Hello there, friends at CCDC, especially to the young people. First of all, I want to thank everybody that participated in the Moses story. You've inspired me to share a story of my own, but thank you for all your acting that you did. You guys were so good in that story. You can see I brought a few of my friends today. They usually participate in virtual church with me, and they like the children's moment, which I hope that you guys do as well. I know that I do. And today I want to share the story of The Baker's Dozen. The Baker's Dozen is retold by Heather Forrest and illustrated by Susan Gaber. And there's a little bit of background to this story. It's at the very end of the book, but I will tell you that there's an author's note. In 1655, when Albany, New York was still called Beverwyck, there lived a colonial baker named Volkert Jan Petersen van Amsterdam. This is a tale of how he came to give 13 in a dozen, inspiring an American custom that in some places persists even today. So there is somewhat of a true story involved with this. And at the beginning, in my family, we always read books on Christmas Eve, and there's a little dedication here. It says, "Dear Jonathan, Merry Christmas, 1990. Give and you will receive. Be generous and you will have more than you need. Much love, Oma." And Oma was my grandmother. She passed away almost 20 years ago. But once a week I go for a run, and I visit her because we did her memorial service at the Dartmouth Outing Club, where Ockham Pond is, and I will go there and I'll pray with her. You know, I know she's gone, but I can still pray with her. And so whether your loved ones are with you or whether they're gone, always remember that there's ways to get in touch with them and have them be a part of your life. So this one is dedicated today, reading to her, to my grandmother. And the book itself is dedicated to the extra measure. So I'm going to move over here so that you guys can see the pages. And as we go, I want you to be good at your counting. We're going to have to count to 12 and then sometimes 13 today. So I will help with the counting today. Van Amsterdam was a baker of great renown. People traveled for miles to buy his goods in Albany town. He baked breads and cakes and muffins of every conceivable kind. He even invented a pastry of his very own design. There are friends in the background. Hello, friends. One day, just before the winter holidays, as Van Amsterdam was rolling out his cookie dough, he was inspired to cut out the shape of a jolly round man. Then he gave it 2 raisins for eyes and a little walnut for a mouth. After baking the cookie character, he painted it with red and white icing so that it looked just like St. Nicholas. There you go. He proudly put the cookie in his shop window. A passerby, noticing it, came in to order several. Delighted, Van Amsterdam spent the rest of the day cutting and baking those tasty cookies. Before long, the St. Nicholas cookies had become famous. Now, people came from even farther away to buy his St. Nicholas cookies in Albany town. And of course, they bought his other goods as well. Van Amsterdam grew quite prosperous, and one night, as he was busy counting his money, a thought occurred to him. If I use just a little less butter, no one will know. If I use just 1 less egg, they will scarcely be able to tell. If I use just a little less honey, then there will be more money for me. And no one did notice when Van Amsterdam started to use just a little less of all his fine ingredients he had always used in his baking. No one noticed because Van Amsterdam was famous. People had stopped judging the quality of his goods, for his goods were famous too. One day, into his shop came an old woman wearing a long black shawl over her head. She said, "Van Amsterdam, I have come to purchase 1 dozen of your famous St. Nicholas cookies." "Very well," he said. Taking a cloth bag, he filled it with 1 dozen of his finest cookies and handed it to the old woman. This is where we need some help counting. So you want to count how many cookies there are. That's 1, 2, 3. Count with me. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 cookies. She took the bag from him, opened it, and then looked up, complaining. Van Amsterdam, you've cheated me. I asked for a dozen cookies, and look here. You've given me only 12. A dozen means 12, Van Amsterdam stated firmly. A dozen means 13, she insisted, and you're a greedy man. Van Amsterdam was a proud man who did not like to be judged harshly by anyone. I am a good and honest baker, he shouted. A dozen means 12 and not one more. How dare you call me greedy? Get out of my store. There she goes. As the old woman swept out of his shop, she turned back and said, You'll be sorry, Van Amsterdam. The next morning, when Van Amsterdam took his loaves from the oven, he was shocked to discover that his bread tasted salty. His pies were sour. His cookies were so hard they couldn't be bitten. Everything he made turned out wrong. I don't understand, he said. Has it been so long since I used a proper measure that I have forgotten my recipes? Well, perhaps tomorrow will be better. But it was no better. His breads rose so high he could not get them out of the oven. His cakes crumbled. Everything he baked tasted terrible. It wasn't long before people who came to his shop to buy his pies and cakes and cookies and muffins had to admit that even though Van Amsterdam's bakery was famous, the things he made there didn't taste good at all. So they stopped coming. And as people stopped coming, Van Amsterdam stopped baking. One day, near Christmas, he sat in his shop with nothing left to sell but a small pile of those St. Nicholas cookies. He eyed his empty shelves and wondered, why has my fortune gone from so good to so bad? Van Amsterdam began to cry. It may have been the tears in his eyes, but it seemed to Van Amsterdam that the mouth of one of the St. Nicholas cookies was moving. He heard a voice say, You'll never be rich because you're greedy. And if you look closely here, there's a black shawl in the window. Uh-oh. At that moment, there was a knock at the door, and into his shop came the old woman wearing the long black shawl. She said, Van Amsterdam, I've come back to purchase 1 dozen of your famous St. Nicholas cookies. Wide-eyed and trembling, Van Amsterdam reached for a bag and opened it. Into the bag he put 12 St. Nicholas cookies. He looked up at the old woman and then slowly put in 1 more. She took the bag from him with a grin. She opened it and carefully counted the cookies. Thank you, she said. If you want to count the cookies too, we can get them close here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Did you count 13? I know I counted 13. Well, word went through the town that at Van Amsterdam's shop a dozen means 13. People started coming back to buy that baker's dozen. Van Amsterdam began baking again and put an extra measure into everything he made. Soon, his shop prospered. All the other bakers noticed how busy Van Amsterdam's shop had become, so they too began to give 13 in a dozen. The custom spread throughout the colonies, for merchants had discovered that when generosity replaces greed, good fortune follows, and soon, in many a bakery store, a dozen meant 12, and then one more. And I've done most of the counting, but these cookies are big, so I'm going to let you count the 12, and then one more. And as they say at church, here ends the reading. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Oh, and a special thanks to Gulliver Books. That was our publisher today of The Baker's Dozen. Merry Christmas.